Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. Audre Lorde. Bending, Not Breaking, The Gifts of Imperfection Edition. Episode 9, Guidepost 7. Cultivating rest and play. Letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol. All right. Welcome back to Bending, Not Breaking. This is your host, Ben Pruitt, and we are so thankful that you have joined us by listening in. Some of you are even supporting us on Patreon, and y'all are super cool. I really appreciate you. BNB_pod. I'll probably mention that again later. Anyway, we are a podcast that is all about treating Avatar: The Last Airbender and the Avatar verse as sacred. And right now we are engaging with Brene Brown's Gifts of Imperfection, which is one of her earlier books. And we're excited because we're diving into that in conversation with everything Avatar. And so we're learning about all these things that Brene Brown is teaching us, and we're using Avatar to kind of like amplify and learn and see it in practice through the show. And so today we are really excited to bring on a new special guest. And so I would love to introduce Yazmin Spearman. Yazmin is a Black creative, a sister, a friend, a foodie, and a lover of all things Hayao Miyazaki. Currently, she's pursuing her master's in divinity at Duke Divinity School with me, and with a concentration in advocacy and social justice. And so let's warmly welcome Yazmin. How are you today?
So well. I'm excited and really happy to be here. I already said that to you. I'm so pumped. You know, I love Avatar. You know, I love talking about play. And then also just today is a beautiful day. I came off of a great weekend. I'm about to go into another great weekend, and I'm about to go to the movies tonight. So just inserting fun in the midst of like,
I love that.
A ridiculous week. So
yeah.
What are you
going to go see tonight?
Venom 2.
Venom 2. All right, y'all. You heard it from Yazmin. We're going to get a full update on Venom 2.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. So how do you feel about today's episode? I'm sensing that you are pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I'm so pumped. I mean, I remember when I was reading Brene Brown's book on the Gifts of Imperfection, which you referenced before. And I remember the first time I stumbled on this guidepost, and this book came out a while ago.
It was like 10 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Right. And I think I read it probably like 4 years ago. And at that place in my life where there was no space for play, there was no space for rest. And I mean, you kicked off this podcast so well with a quote from my favorite writer of all time, Audre Lorde. I love that woman. But also as another Black woman, and just seeing that rest and play and joy and goodness can be things I think in my community we may not engage in and make space for. So I'm so excited to talk about it from that angle.
Yeah, I can't wait to learn from you, right? And so I'm really excited because I was talking to random people around school and saying, who do you know of that is a good example of someone who is good at resting and good at playing? And one of our mutual friends was like, you need to talk to Yazmin. and I was like, tell me more. And then he just went on this like rant of how like all these things that you do. And I was sitting here going like, oh my goodness, she would be. And then he ended it by saying, and I'm pretty sure she likes Avatar. And I was like, oh yeah, sealed the deal right there.
This is perfect.
Yeah. I'm interested, like, what is your relationship with the Avatar universe? Just so our listeners know what that's like for you.
Of course. So super excited to share. So I was one of those kids back when Avatar was first launching who waited right at the time. I think it probably aired at like 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, depending on your time zone, who would close my door, be like, please do not disturb me. New episode is on. So I was in that generation when it was first coming out on television. who would either just beg for more time to stay up at night or do my homework real quick so I would have time for it. So I became a fan literally as others from the first episode. A fond memory I have is I remember, what was this? This might have been book 5 on fire. Maybe was that book 5? I can't remember, but it was the last book on fire.
Fire's book 3.
Is 3?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
It depends on what's happening during it, right?
I'm thinking about the finale. That's what I was
book
thinking
3.
about.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it was like the last, like on the finale, I remember that's when he had hair and everything, and then they shaved off the hair.
Yep.
And that literally, when I think about Avatar, I think about that one memory that I have, and I was so close to the TV, because I was just super excited. Everything has been leading up to this one moment.
Yes.
So, yeah. So still, how many years later? I mean, I was in elementary school. Obviously, over 10 years later, still a diehard fan.
Love it.
So good. So,
well, that's awesome. So that's really cool because for your sake, and I guess for listeners who don't remember me talking about this way back in season 1, I started listening or watching Avatar like later in life. I was like in my 20s, and I just kept on hearing like, this is so good. I'm like, it's a cartoon. I like cartoons. I like anime and all that jazz, but this seems it seems like a kid's show. And then I watched it and I was like, oh my goodness. And I was just hooked from the beginning, binged all of it, watched it multiple times. It was just, and now we're here, doing an Avatar podcast, right? Okay. So it is what it is. That's just how it works sometimes. Awesome. So, okay. And then I already heard you talk about this lovely space you've been making just this weekend for all of these moments of rest and play. And it seems like you're full of energy, which is like anathema to most people in graduate school, right? So like, again, I if you were to just tell me about, in a headline, what is your relationship to play and rest?
Yeah, in a headline, let's say, oh man, maybe if you had asked me a year ago, I would have said like, it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's complicated. And now I would say my relationship with rest and play is like a dance. It probably is like a dance. Yeah. 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 Before it was more like a wrestling match.
Yeah.
I was going TKO'd by the end, burnt out.
Yeah.
And now it does. I love that word about sacred. It really does feel like a sacred dance. And there's a lot of beauty to it. So if I could give it in like a small tagline, that's probably what my relationship with.
Wow. Well, hopefully we'll get to tango throughout this conversation
I love that.
and it'll be really cool. So, all right, y'all, this is like, we've set the pitch, we've set the standard. This is what you're getting, a teaser of what we're about to dive into. So get ready, because here it comes. Let's get some logistics out of the way just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But so we are reading The Gifts of Imperfection. If you are following along in your book, it's on page 127 through 133 in the 10th anniversary edition. If not, don't worry, you can just not follow along. That's totally cool. But next week we're also, FYI, tackling Guidepost 8, which is 134 through 140 in that edition. So just FYI, those are all the page numbers if you want to keep up. So now we're diving into the real legit content stuff. This is where it gets real. So we're starting with kind of following through Brene Brown's chapter and interjecting some stuff from our own lives and from Avatar, right? And so she starts explaining the concept of play first. But before we really touch on that, I feel like we have to assess where we are in terms of this wholehearted inventory that we both took, right? And so for you, you measured somewhere on this spectrum from 0 to 100. Where do you fall on the spectrum of rest and play?
Yeah, that one was closer to 100. So that was almost equal to the laughter song and dance, or the joy one, and also joy and gratitude. Those 3 were like pretty much probably like 80s, 90s range on that one. And I think some of it might've been for me. I don't like saying I always do anything.
Sure. Yeah,
So
me either.
it's like, who can say that? So I'm like, often, I think,
Yeah.
because I think it was like always often 50-50,
Yep.
rarely never.
Yeah.
So yeah, those three were like my top.
I never pick absolutes. And then
Right?
of course, I
Yeah.
struggle with a lot of those personality profiles or even those random questionnaires that are just like, anytime there's always or never, I'm like,
It's like, but that one time,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like, actually this weekend. So it's like, who can say? Who can say? But
well, I think what that's helpful for is for me, I got none of mine were close to 80-90%. All of mine were right around between 40 and 60. So I'm sitting here going like super mediocre hardcore on all of these guideposts again. But this is why we have you, right?
Yeah.
Right. And this, I didn't know you were going to score that high when I asked you to take it, but it's one of those things where this is a really great opportunity for me to be like, okay, this person does this really well. How do I take notes? And so for those of you who are listening to, like, here's clearly the expert on some play, y'all. So here we are. Awesome. So now that we know where we stand, and again, our listeners are hopefully have taken this inventory and know kind of where they stand. Ideally, what that gives us is a chance to go into this conversation knowing what are the things that we need to keep an eye out for that will help us on our hopefully our way to close the gap and cultivating this rest and cultivating play, and then letting go of the ookie gookie exhaustion as a status symbol, right? All right. So you had read this book before, which is also a plus. Had you ever read or heard of Stuart Brown before you heard of this, before you read it in Brene's work?
Oh, definitely not. No, I hadn't.
So for those of you who haven't read the book, Stuart Brown, no relation to Brene, is a psychiatrist, a clinical researcher, a founder of the National Institute for Play, and the author of Play, How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, and Invigorates the Soul. And his core assertion is that play shapes the brain. It helps foster empathy. It helps navigate complex social groups. And at its core, it is the source of creativity and innovation. So that's a bold statement, right? Yeah. Especially in a world where everyone's talking about empathy and it's so important to be empathetic towards people. And he's saying that it opens the imagination, and imagination is what allows for empathy to happen in the first place. If I can't imagine myself in someone else's situation, then I can't really be empathetic, right?
That's powerful. Yeah.
So I'm curious for you, Yazmin, like when you hear this or when you think about this, what comes up for you? What bubbles up?
Yeah. So what immediately comes up, especially about the piece with imagination, what comes to mind is memories that I have when I was a child. I was somebody who loved stories, who loved books. I still am. I still am that way. But I remember my mom used to work at a retail shoe store. She had 3 jobs at the time. And this one was like, it would go late into the night. And I would be in the back room. And all there were like a few pieces of paper, a highlighter, just like knickknack stuff. And I remember writing a whole book called The Lost Library Card. I illustrated the whole thing. I know. Wow. I illustrated the whole thing. And after that, I literally can tell you some of the books that one was Santa Got Stuck Down the Chimney. It was a story about, it was a story about Santa eating so many cookies, like his reindeer had to pull him out of the chimney because he was just like at this point, I'm stuck. And so I just ended up writing all of these stories. And what I found amazing at that point, because I'm still a writer, but I take a lot of, you talk about empathy for my younger self, who wasn't really thinking about, oh my gosh, I could make money off of this. Or, oh my gosh, like is this a logical story? I mean, like the Lost Library Card could speak, the card spoke, I kind of just threw anything that my imagination could think of. And that was play also to me. I loved reading, but I also loved creating any idea that came to mind. But I realized, and I think this is the kicker, as I got older, and some aspect of what it means to be an adult was like, no, there's logistics to writing. Like, you know what I'm talking about?
Oh
Like
yeah,
now there's
grammar.
grammar.
Yeah.
We said at the same time, I still have not figured out grammar. Every time my mom reads a paper, she's like, you have so many commas. You don't need these commas. And I found, I know like y'all probably covered this, the guidepost about perfectionism, but I found that filtered in when we talk about exhaustion as a status symbol and all of those things. I found that play, the creativity, the innovation was getting sapped out for me as an
Yeah.
artist when I started listening to this messaging that said, okay, but is this good? Is this sellable? What do other people think about it? It became less about, I just enjoy doing this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not really trying to write the next bestseller. I'm just like getting an idea out. It became, well, is it a good idea though? Like someone might have already written that. That's kind of dumb. And the minute I started listening to those thoughts, I found as I got older, I stopped writing like for
Yeah.
many, many years. Cause I mean, that was an oppressive voice, of course,
Oh,
but but also, again, there was that tension of like play and enjoyment, and it didn't have to have a purpose. That was very childlike. And the other side of it that said, no, that has to have purpose. That has to have meaning. It has to make sense.
yeah.
It has to be certain. And that completely killed out everything that Dr. Stuart Brown was talking about innovation, creativity, empathy. That those periods of my life, I would say I was at like if I probably took this test then, you talking about being in the 40 and 60 range, I'm pretty sure I would have gotten 10, 20%.
Oh no.
It literally was low. It was
Well,
very, very low. So
I love
yeah.
what you're doing there is you're illustrating that we have capacity for change, right? And so what that change looks like is we can both like lose our ability to engage with these guideposts, and we can cultivate these things. These are things that we can work on and bring into our lives. And so it's not a lost cause if we're at 10 or 20 or 40, right? And if it were, I'd be spending a lot more time in therapy than I am now.
That's real.
And frankly, even if we are at 90, that doesn't mean that we're doing it perfectly either, right?
Yeah.
Or at 100. Again, it still doesn't mean we're doing it perfectly. It still has to be a practice that we are constantly revisiting and choosing every day, right?
Exactly.
Oof, which is, lots of good things and tough things about that statement.
Sure.
So the Stuart Brown's really interesting because Stuart Brown was originally a researcher on violence.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting to hear this story. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about it. So Stuart Brown was called in as one of the psychiatrists to help address a massacre that happened in Texas in like the 80s.
Okay.
And in the 80s, it was a really kind of a big deal. And nowadays we feel like it's like gun violence happens like all the time, and we're almost like conditioned to it, which is like it feels really icky. But back then it didn't seem like that was the case. It certainly didn't feel like that culturally. And so the governor of Texas was like, we need a team, and like wasn't thinking about like a task, like budget was not like a thing that they were thinking about. And they just brought in a bunch of these people in Texas to to make sure this would never happen again. And Stuart Brown was one of these people. And so he started studying people in jail, and started studying inmates, and started studying people who have had a history of violence. And what he found was consistent among people who were violent in their adult years was a lack of play in their childhood years.
Wow.
And so that led him to be like, okay, play, really important. And so he started studying play instead. And so like, I'm getting chills just thinking about that.
I was just like, oh my gosh. You would not think that. That's crazy.
Right? It's very counterintuitive, but like, I think that's kind of the point, and what makes this so interesting, right? Is that when like just at base level, when we don't allow ourselves to play, we are putting ourselves in jeopardy of acting outside of our values later on. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, that means I need to start playing hardcore.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So
crazy.
let's dive into some of the things that Stuart Brown talks about as what constitutes play, because it's play for him is not what you and I like think of without like diving into it, right? His baseline for play is that it is a state of mind rather than an activity, right? But activities can induce that state of mind, which is often how we experience it. But it's an emotional state more than it is a like thing that we do. Which is really neat. And so he introduces 7 things that are properties of play in his book. And I'm really excited to dive in, because the first one is one that Brene Brown talks about in The Gifts of Imperfection, which is the idea that play has to be purposeless. So it's like done for play's sake. It's done because it's fun and we want to, and there's no other reason, right? And it's like there is no like our self-worth isn't attached to our accomplishments through this thing. So if I'm sitting here going like, I have to play because it's going to make me a better person, like that's not play, right?
Brene told me to play. So
Brene told me to play. Like that's not how it works, right?
Yes.
Because when I say, like, for a lot of people, and tell me how this kind of vibes with you, I'm curious. Like when I say, all right, y'all, we're going to invest in time that has, we're going to spend the next hour doing nothing for nothing's sake. How does that sound for you?
Literally, did you actually see the laugh that really came out?
Right?
I'm like, if you could, I was just imagining you saying that in any space. And it's like, everyone's like, wait, what?
Excuse me. That sounds like an anxiety attack.
Who is this person? Get them out. Get them out.
Like, could you imagine in a group of graduate students saying, all right, y'all, for the next hour, we're not doing anything. Like everyone would be like, I
know. That one person, what do you mean by doing
Define nothing?
What is nothing? Do you mean like I can't, I could see that one person. There's always that one person.
So and I guess I'm thinking about this, and when like, referencing our prior conversations on the guideposts, what happens is we've talked about scarcity a lot. And when we are in this scarcity mindset where there isn't enough, there's not enough time, we are not good enough there, where that shame tape is playing, doing anything outside of our to-do list becomes stressful.
Oh, you say that. Yeah.
Right. So play becomes a source of stress if we're living in this scarcity mindset.
Exactly.
What is your experience with that? Like you are supposedly doing this really well, right? This whole play thing. And so I'm curious, how do you grapple with scarcity? What are the things that you tell yourself when things are, or when you're feeling scarce?
Oh my gosh. What is not said? So this is so multi-layered I'm serious. This is so multi-layered for me. On one level, it is some of the things that she mentioned in her book of, okay, I definitely related to when she said, from the moment, like either we open our eyes, it's like, I didn't get enough sleep. I don't have enough time. It's like, you just woke up, and I've thought that. But I also am conscious of the ways in which my own experience, particularly as a Black woman in America, that has also shaped that, of saying like, there's a real concept in a context where there's not a lot. And I think there have been just either different ideologies or thoughts towards Black people of like, you're kind of worthless. And so then my community historically combated that with exceptionalism. And that's how that plays into scarcity, which says like, do more, be more, prove that you're this, prove that you're smart, prove that you're that, prove that you're a human being.
Yeah.
And of course, that comes from an experience of trauma, an experience of violence.
Yes.
But I saw the unintentional impacts, the symptoms, the byproducts of it, of man, I have this scarcity mentality and also this constant underthrum of anxiety that I can't stop. And when I stop, I'm already running out. The clock is ticking, not enough time. And so I'm conscious of my context and my generational history and also just the American narrative. That says from the minute I think that we're born, the value system is like, be exceptional, like make your life count. So many self-help books are about like, now is your time. I just saw like the most, I'm serious. I just saw one of the most best-selling Christian books right now is called You Were Made for This Moment. Like it's all this kind of pressure. And so anytime you're not living into that, it's like, I think it feeds into sometimes that scarcity mentality that I've experienced in my life. So that's just me on my end. Yeah.
I love that you brought in this concept of exceptionalism, right? Because when we're acting out of scarce, we have to be like, we can't just be ordinary, right?
You can't.
Ordinary is not enough, right? You have to be extraordinary.
Exactly.
But then what that does is it creates this like perfectionism loop that Indira was talking about on the episode that we did with perfectionism. And it's what DeAndrea spoke about in her episode. And now you are lifting it up as well. And I think that that's just something that our listeners, I hope, are tracking those consistencies between the three of you, because it's really important, right? And because it's like, yikes. Okay. All right. So the goal here is we have to convince ourselves that playing is not a waste of time, right? Yeah. Playing has inherent worth. And so let's go back to this. What started us down this road was the idea that something has to be purposeless, right? But just because this is something that I want to tease out a little bit, because just because we are doing something for a purpose doesn't mean that it has to be that it won't become play. I think that's really important, because like I am doing this podcast for a purpose, right? It has a purpose, but I often find myself experiencing play and entering that state of mind, even though I'm doing it with a purpose. And so I kind of want to just like challenge this concept a little bit, right? But it's one of those things where it is inherently purposeless in the sense that we are doing it. Like there are times when this podcast is not play, and it's because, okay, I have to get this done. It's due to, it has to post tomorrow. Right. And so there, like when we have the added pressure of purpose, it takes away from that state of mind. And I think that's what Stuart Bound is trying to get to. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it really does. Especially that last line that you said too. I feel like it's linked to this aspect of pressure, it's like, I have to, and then it really does suck the joy and the play out of it. But I love the challenge though that you gave to it. It says, and I actually, when I was going through this, I realized I was like, man, there are actually things in my life where I'm like, they have purpose to them, but I also find play. So it can be a both and. Like, it's like, if it's play, then it has to be purposeless. And so then I struggled where I was like, I'm, whether I'm like on an online writing community, and it's like, this has a purpose, the thing that I'm creating, and there are people holding me accountable, but it's also really fun. And so is there space, for that complexity?
I think it's navigating the tension between purpose and purposeless. As soon as you're doing it for the sake of the purpose, and there's no other added benefits or joy derived from it, right? That's when it becomes problematic. Right. And I think we'll address this tension when we start talking about in one of our next guideposts, the concept of meaningful work. Right. And that's something we're going to be talking about soon. Okay. So let's talk about purposeless in the sense of like Avatar. Right. Are there any moments for you that come up around moments where they were playing and there wasn't like, it did not seem like it was going along with their goals?
Oh my God. See, it's very hard in some sense. It's very hard in some sense to just pinpoint some of them. I mean, I can think about like, of course, the times where he would want to go penguin sledding or things like that. But I think just in a broader sense, when I've thought about this concept and then thinking about Avatar, I'm like, I think it's all over the place. I mean, you have basically a boy, like just a child. Who the actual fate of the world rests on his shoulders. And he wants to play. Like, and he has these moments, he's like, let's do this. And it's like, you should be practicing. You should be, because the fate of the world. And I think there's always these interjecting moments. not just that remind us
Yes.
like, oh wait, not just in the sense of, oh yes, this is a child, because then I think it can become kind of reductionistic of like,
Yeah.
oh, of course they want to play because it's a child, but more of like, wait, it might there be more here, that there's this huge pressure that's placed on somebody, and they also need these spaces, again, that tension that you're
Yes.
talking about, to go penguin sledding, to
Yeah.
you know, to even play around, you know, with actually I even think about I don't think it's connected to play in any way, but just a scene that came to mind is when Aang was learning how to firebend the first time, and you could see the smile on his face. Like, it was, again, here's a purpose.
The wonder,
and,
right?
You know, he was a purpose, but it also brought joy. You know, you could actually see the smile on his face. And then when he unintentionally, of course, hurt Katara.
Yes.
And so I think I see these moments, these threads, like beads in a way, strung together throughout the show, where you do see these interjections of play, but again, against this, the fate of the world rests on your shoulders. And so I feel like, again, what you were saying before, here is that tension embodied.
Yes.
Of like, that is a purpose that is meaningful. It's not something that somebody can just be like, oh, throw it away. That's a real responsibility.
Yeah.
But also there's another road too that's equally important to honor play, and that is something, it's not just the actions, but like you said, it's something that Aang embodies, this playfulness. Yeah.
And that's really important, because, and I love that you're lifting that up, because what you're saying is reminding me of this moment in season 3 where they're all on the beach. Sokka's doing the sandcastle with Suki.
Oh, yeah.
Toph has this, like, you know, bossing say in perfect form, like, and, you know, everybody is kind of like just enjoying themselves, including Aang. And then Zuko comes in and says, you should be training, and starts attacking him, right? And chases him around. And it's one of those things where that's the voice that we have to listen to, but also be like, not today.
Hold that voice.
Not today. Right. And those people that are trying to tell us that are often the people that love us.
Yes.
And that makes it even harder to not to be like, I'm gonna take some time today, and I need you to not say that anymore right now. So I just wanted to lift that up too. I think that's a really important moment. Yeah. Okay. So the first premise, or what is it? Criteria.
It was like the first rule,
for play. Property. Thank you. Yeah. And the second one, first one is purposelessness. The second one is it has to be voluntary. It can't be something that is compulsory, right? Compulsory play is not fun. It's like when I say, okay, class, let's all stand in a circle and we're going to play a name game. Everybody's right? It's like, ew, right?
My whole body cringed.
Right? It's just like, and so like compulsory play is not fun. And this really makes me think of very early on in the show, Aang and Sokka, where they are this is episode 3. They're visiting the Southern Air Temple, and Aang is learning, like, confirming mass genocide of his people, right? Yeah. He is learning about that. And Sokka's like, okay, what can I do to lift his spirits? Because Aang has just said, oh, look, it's the airball rink. We used to have so much fun here. And Sokka's like, okay, make him feel better. Make him feel better. Tell me about airball. And then they start playing. And let's be real, Sokka is not an airbender. Of course. Right? He is not doing this for the sake of having fun. He is doing this to help Aang, right? There is like this, I am interpreting that he feels a compulsion to do this, and it doesn't feel voluntary. Does that example resonate with you? Does that make sense?
It really does. I mean, and I feel like that's also such a complicated story with that as well too, because like you were saying, here's a moment of grief, of difficulty.
Yes.
And someone who's trying to come alongside and say, okay, wait, I know you just mentioned this memory. I know this is important to you. Let's do this. And that's complicated because on the one hand, it's like, is that the context for, is that helpful? Yeah. But I think that resonates. And it also begs the question too, is like, is there, I even don't want to say this, I'm just being devil's advocate on this point.
Yeah,
but like,
I love it.
Is there a time and place for play? Is there a time where it's like, because I don't like being the person, I really actually am not the person who's like, is this appropriate? Is this inappropriate? I'm not really that person, but I also think about these moments where I can say for myself, I have a naturally, because I'm the youngest out of three,
Ah,
I have a playful kind of personality. I love doing that. But I also recognize that at moments where I've been really low or experiencing, mental health issues and everything like that, the people who try to come alongside and be like, oh, let's, you're playful, let's play. And I'm just like,
no, thank you.
no, thank you. Like normally, like, and
Yeah.
so that's what I'm saying. I feel like that it also complicates the narrative too,
Yeah.
and begs questions. Yeah.
I love what you're pointing to. And for me, I think it's an empathic miss
Yeah.
when we are trying to turn on the light too soon.
Ooh, that's good. That's
Right.
good. That's really
Um,
good. That's
and
really
and
good.
I think that's what you're describing. And I don't think that's what's happening in this scene
No,
though,
no,
because I don't think Aang has gotten to the point where the light's off yet. I
no,
think
it's not.
Sokka realizes that the light's about to go off and it's about to get
Yeah.
dark, and he's like, "Let's
Yeah.
keep the light on a little bit longer."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Let's be helpful. Yeah.
Which again may not be it. Like for me, like I would probably say, "Okay, Aang, let's have the talk. It's
Mm-hmm.
time."
That could be
But
helpful. Yeah.
I think of, all the moments in Harry Potter, just to reference another
Oh,
series, where
oh, good.
Dumbledore doesn't tell Harry what's really going on because he loves
Oh,
him, and he like
yeah.
that feeling gets in the way. And so I have so much grace
Yeah.
for people who are like, I don't want to see you hurt, and so I'm
Yeah.
gonna keep this light on for a little longer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the ethical, like, when do we have this conversation, is something that I want to definitely keep in mind, and
Yeah.
everybody's going to have a different answer.
Of course.
But yeah, I think that's an important thing to pay attention to when we talk about this, for sure.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. Yeah.
All right, so we've got two properties: purposeless, voluntary. There is an inherent attraction, which means for you it is fun.
Yeah.
Right? But here's the deal, Yazmin,
Yeah.
what's fun for you isn't always fun for me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I would probably, if you told me to sit down and like do some creative writing, I don't
Mhm.
think that would be fun.
Yeah.
I would be sitting
Yeah.
there going like, this is involuntary.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. I know.
there
Yeah.
is an actual purpose to this. I'm doing it because she asked me to. Right.
Yeah.
And so like what's fun for me and what's fun for you is different. And I think that's something that a lot of people like fail to honor.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Right. Like how is that manifested for you? Are there like, what's your friend group like? Do you all have the same interests?
Oh no, not at all. Oh no, not at all. Yeah. I have some friends where, oh, I remember this. When I was in college, I had a friend where indoor rock climbing, so much fun for them. My short self, I felt like a marionette strung up on these strings.
Yeah.
My muscles, my arms are hurting. I'm like this for them. I think they loved blending like exercise and
Yeah.
gym. And I was like, see, I don't mind maybe if we go like hiking in the great outdoors, but
Yep.
but being inside a sterilized building and everything's kind of artificial, they're like, isn't this so much fun? And I was like, well, it is something. Like it is, it's an experience. That is what it is. It is an experience. And so there are those lines where it's like I was able to do that in trying to build connection and relationship with this friend, but also recognizing, I think that was a visceral example for me where I'm like, this is very fun for them. They're smiling, they're laughing, their body posture is loose and everything. I'm all tense, let's press together, looking at my watch, and so I love this point that you made though about that play, that enjoyment, that pleasure looks different for everybody. And how do we, I think, make space where we don't need to put down one or elevate another form of play, which we easily tend to do in American culture, that kind of competitive comparison nature. Instead of, hey, that's a valid form of play. It may not bring joy and pleasure and everything to me, but how can I celebrate and honor that and value that in you? And I think in a lot of ways that can be hard for us to do, because when we define, well, what is play? I think it's helpful to remember, like you mentioned before, it's a state of being, but the way that it comes out in an activity can look different. There can be a diversity of that, even if the spirit of it is the same.
Yeah, for sure.
You know.
Okay. So we've got purposeless, it's voluntary,
Yeah.
there's an inherent attraction, so it's fun. The next element is freedom from time, which means when we're doing it and when we're engaged in it, we lose track of time. Right. Some people call this like flow state also. So like the best way I can think to like describe this is, you're gone into a movie theater and then you watch the movie, you come out and you're like, oh my goodness, it's dark outside.
Dark outside,
yeah. It's like, you're
That
reorienting yourself to the world, and it's like, wow, how long was that? And like, that to me is like, that's play, right? When we escape into a world, and it's the same thing that happens when reading, right? All of a sudden we're in this book, and 5 hours later we're like, oh my god, we forgot
I should actually go have lunch. Like, you've just been reading right through. Yeah. Exactly.
So that's a good one. I love thinking about that. So purposeless, voluntary, inherent attraction, freedom from time. This is the one that I think is going to be interesting for people. Diminished consciousness of the self.
Oh my goodness.
Which means, and we stop worrying about whether we look awkward or whether we are like smart or whether we're stupid or any of these things, that like we stop thinking less about how others are perceiving us. Right. So this reminds me of a moment in season 3, episode 2, the headband. So Aang and the Fire Nation children are like, Aang has been in concert, like he's been in class, and they're telling him, this is how you play music, and he was while he was playing. They're like, no. And he's like, y'all, let me show y'all how to have fun, because y'all forgot how to do this. And they all come to this cave that they've been living in, and they start playing music and they start dancing, and you see everybody who's like really worried about how everybody's going to look, and then they're all like slowly getting into this dancing, and then all of a sudden everybody's just having a blast and everybody's having fun, and nobody's worried about whether this dance move looks silly. In fact, people are like being praised for specific dance moves that are super cool. And I think that it's really important to underscore that it's not easy to get into this mindset, right?
Undoubtedly.
Like it's like, that's tough. And so I'm like, okay, so loss of self, thoughts. What are thoughts for you?
Oh my goodness. I know y'all are going to probably touch on this one later, but it immediately brings to mind the other guidepost about dancing.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I remember Brene Brown says this line where she's like, dancing feels so vulnerable, because that's one of those areas. I remember seeing it when I used to go to different, I don't want to call them school dances, but when they would have just like a president's ball or something at my college.
The gala.
The gala. I would only stay for like 30 minutes. But you like, there's a sense too, and I think we viscerally see it, where everyone's kind of looking at each other, and it's like, oh, they can really dance, but I can't really dance. And it's, and what is dancing? After all,
what is this?
What does it mean really to dance? In my mind, I'm like, if you have confidence, you're fine. Like, just fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
But I think I see it there. I think, I don't know. I have an odd hunch that we tend to have a very low view, in meaning like we tend to not value children in the way that we should. And so we tend to judge anybody who takes on anything that looks like childishness, is what we'll say. It might be more like they're acting childlike, but we tend to hold that in disdain, because you need to be an adult. All of life is about, you just wait till you can get older, because then you have responsibilities. You just want to get away from being a child. And so I think that really plays out. That really plays out in activities where it's like, hey, why don't you, I think they say lose your inhibitions, but just have fun. Like, don't be conscious of yourself. We're like, okay, how do I not be conscious of myself? I'm going to work at not being conscious. You can see the wheels turning, because we have been trained in a lot of ways. And again, I think this is tied to all of the other guideposts, again, on authenticity, especially, of like, wait, so what matters right now is how I feel about myself, how I'm
Yes.
being in this space. But I've been conditioned, especially in my context, that says, no, what other people say about me and what they think about me matters more than how I feel in this moment. And I think Brene Brown, I don't know if this is actually in The Gifts of Imperfection. It might be in one of her other books. Like I thought it was just me or something. That's one of her other books. Where she gives this example, maybe it actually is in this book, but she gives this example of dancing with her daughter in the department store.
I remember this.
Yeah, like her daughter's dancing, and then there's another mom there with her daughter, and there's this again that look of disdain.
Yeah.
And her daughter Ellen freezes, and she's like, "Mom, like what do I do?" And she recognized she had this moment to either join or join in on that disdain of like, stop doing that, you know, but instead just decided to dance really silly. And so I see it a lot in with dance, but also like why we don't really want to risk. I've seen that in my own life. And then I recognized I was like, you know, I'm just going to play music around my apartment.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's being in my car and having someone else there and just singing on the top of my lungs because I like the song.
Yeah.
But always hearing this voice, oh, your voice cracked. Oh, you don't sound good. That's not your song. Well, why not? I like it. And so I think it's an everyday, that state of being. I think we always face that disdain, not just from others, but I think we have that voice internally as well.
Yes.
You know?
You're like, if I've been told that I need to reduce my gold star thinking, but I would give you lots of gold stars for every time you bring in another every time you bring in all the other guideposts. It's like, oop, gold star, they all connect.
So
but yeah, anyway, I think that what you're pointing to is something that's really important. Like I think about me going to like weddings and going dancing at weddings. And this is again, like going back to the diminished consciousness of self, right? When I'm at a wedding and I'm the first person on the dance floor, I'm feeling like, all right, this is going to be awkward.
Small dance moves.
But like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the one that makes it comfortable for me to do this later. And then other people join in, and like acts of courage like that. Make it safe for other people to do the same. Right. And I also think there's a really important point here of we have to be able to make it through some initial boredom or discomfort or whatever it might be in order to get to the fun, which is, I think, when I think about like phones at the table, like everybody puts away their phone and everybody's like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. But then, you know, if you are able to get through that initial discomfort, what happens is everyone is so much more connected. Right.
So true.
And so we have, and I think that's a problem with children a lot of the times nowadays, is that children aren't taught as often anymore and given the space to get through that discomfort. Right.
Exactly.
And like we have to know that when we're riding a bike up a hill that, oh, this is hard. We don't stop, because at the top of the hill, we get to like coast all the way down the other side. But if you never get to the top of the hill, you're never going to want to get to the top of the hill.
Oh, that's so good.
So we have to like practice getting through a little bit of discomfort in order to get to the fun sometimes, I think, of play.
Exactly. That's so good.
Thanks. So we got purposeless, voluntary, inherent attraction, freedom from time, diminished self, improv potential. Right. So it's not rigid. It's open to serendipity. It's open to chance. I think about Iro with his tea. He's like, I want some of this tea. Oh, we're going to make a little blend here, or have a new little tea blend there. And, you know, it's just, there's improv potential. It can change. It's not subject to too many rules. And if there are, you can like change the rules. Hello, creative writing. And so, right, there's improv potential. And then there's two more. The next one, continuation desire, i.e., we want to keep doing it, right? But here's the catch. When you do play, and like, I want to keep playing for longer than you want to keep playing, right? So there's this line where we have to negotiate when and how and long we're playing, right? Because it's better to stop in the middle of play where it's still play for everyone than it is to stop only after everyone is done, because everybody starts to hate that game if you continue to play. I think about Monopoly, like
Oh
everybody's
my
having,
gosh.
there's this play that happens for the first hour, and then it's like, okay, hour 2 begins. And then it's the
Yes.
countdown until the game's over.
It's like a never ending game. We had that recently with Spicy Uno. It's one of my favorite games. That's a
Yeah.
fun game. I enjoy it. But when Uno is not ending, because that person who still has a ton of cards and we're
Yeah.
still waiting for them to say Uno, you're like, I remember at one point I just got up. I was like, y'all continue playing. I am officially done with this game.
Yep. Love it.
Sayonara.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying.
Awesome. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we did it. We gamed all 7. Improv potential and continuation desire are the 7 including the ones we talked about before. All of these are these properties of play, right? And so Stuart Brown argues that play as a brain state that we need to get into is non-negotiable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is a line that when I read his book stuck out hardcore.
Okay.
The opposite of play is not work. It's depression.
Wow. Man, that's good. Yeah.
Like, let that
like,
sink
wait,
in.
What?
Yeah, let that sink in. And it's just like true play that is from our inner needs and desires is the only path to finding lasting joy.
Mm-hmm.
And as we discussed on prior episode, like joy is like that sacred connection to other people that we experience. And it's also the source of satisfaction in our work, which is, again, all of these guideposts are talking to each other, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's non-negotiable. We can't negotiate our need for play.
Yeah.
So similarly, the other half of the thing that we were talking about today is rest. And so play and rest are really similar. And it's interesting because they're in the book. Stuart Brown says that there's a laboratory evidence that there is a play deficit, much like the well-documented sleep deficit that exists. Are you familiar with sleep deficit?
No, I was not. Actually, when I read that, I was like, huh.
So sleep deficit is the recommended CDC suggests that we should be getting 8 hours of sleep a night.
Yes.
And so how many people are getting 8 hours of sleep a night nowadays, do you think?
Oh my God. Very few.
Very few, right? And so the typical response is, well, I don't need 8 hours of sleep.
Yes. Yeah.
I can get by on 4, or I can get by on this. And like everybody's like, that's me. Like, hey, guess what? Science suggests that's incorrect. And so we are a society and culture that is in a well-documented sleep deficit. And so what Stuart Brown is suggesting is that there is a play deficit as well. And you ever heard of sleep debt? So this is when like I don't sleep one night, and then if I sleep that amount the next day, I don't catch up, right? I have to sleep like double the amount. It's like there's interest involved. The same is apparently true for play.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things where that speaks a lot for me to burnout culture as well, right? So taking a vacation for a couple of days doesn't satisfy the itch of the fact that I am burnt out at this job or in this work or at this whatever I'm doing, right? Unless we're actively playing and incorporating that into our daily rigor, we are going to be we're going to be in a sleep deficit. We're going to be in a play deficit.
Yeah.
How does that, like, what's bubbling up for you as you hear that?
I mean, immediately it's the sense of there's so much truth to that. I feel like that's also just resounding in my own spirit. Because I've seen it. I'm in it,
Yeah.
It sounds bad. It's like, I almost don't need to read a book about it. I just have to go out, It's like, I just got to go to school, or I just got to go to work.
Yeah.
And I think what's so hard about it, immediately what came to mind, the only thought, because while I was listening to you, what you're saying was so great, but was that sleep deficit, that burnout. It's so hard because you were talking about gold stars before. We give people gold stars for that.
It's because exhaustion is a
Yes,
status
it's a
symbol,
status
right?
of, oh, look how dedicated you are.
Oh,
And then the opposite is also true, because I think you can't win on either side, because either one,
exactly.
you either sacrifice your health, there's that, or on the other hand, you sacrifice quote unquote others' well opinion of you if you
And your
go and
health.
say, yeah, and your health there too, because you go and say, hey, I think as I just had a friend do today, I think I need to rest. How many times do we penalize and we police people for that? Wait, what? Or just in a tone, oh, where
Oh, that's
it's
neat.
a word of dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start to doubt someone's reliability, their dedication, and then
Yeah.
that it triggers our shame response of like,
Mm.
now you need to prove to that person. If that shame response is in me, I go and say, wait, no. I am a dedicated person. I am a good student.
Exactly. Yeah.
I am a good worker. So therefore, next time I'm going to work overtime. Next time I'm going to,
It
and
goes
it
back to
just
this idea of exceptionalism, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's why when you're saying that, that play and rest being connected, but I'm also just thinking about the easy thing to do would be to say, yes, just go rest, just go play, without naming the reality that most likely I've experienced this in my life when I started making space for it. Most likely you will at some point face that censure,
Mm.
face that disapproval. And I think, again, to tie it to the other guideposts, unless we are linked to a deep sense of worthiness
Yeah.
within ourselves, but also a deep sense of like, what are my values? This is important to me.
Yeah.
We are going to be shipwrecked by other people's lack of acceptance or approval to honor our humanity in
Yeah.
that.
Mm. Man. So, long story short,
Mhm.
we have to start respecting our body's needs for renewal, right? If we don't, we are going to experience bad things, right? And that's documented as well from the CDC, right? Insufficient sleep is associated with a number of chronic diseases, including diabetes, heart disease, obesity, depression, right? I think of Ang in book 3 again, I think,
Mhm.
Nightmares and Daydreams,
Oh
where
yeah.
what happens is Aang is so in this such scarcity. He's like, I don't have enough time to learn all the things I need to do
Oh
in order to beat the Fire Lord. And so
yeah,
he
there's
starts
depression. Yeah.
incessantly practicing, and to
Yeah.
the point where he has this like red eyes. He starts having nightmares. He
Yeah.
starts like all of these. The body keeps the score, right? The body
Yes.
starts
Go
taking a
ahead.
toll, and it's like, dude, rest or else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, which oof, right? Because and so there's so many things, so many things. So this is why I think pulling Audre Lorde and Trisha Hershey, who is the founder of the NAP Ministry, is really
Oh, I love
important.
the NAP ministries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so a quote from Trisha is, we believe rest is a form of resistance, and
Yes.
we name sleep deprivation as a racial and social justice issue.
Yep. Yes.
So I'm curious, what are your reflections on that? Can you help for people who might be like, what do you mean? Can you help elaborate on that at all?
Oh yeah. So, oh man. Two incredibly, oh my gosh, incredible women. But I can only speak about it first from like a perspective
Sure.
as a Black woman, and why I feel like that is as Audre Lorde said, a radical act of self-care. And it is very liberative. But I think when you talk about oppression, I've said to a few people as well, oppression, if you probably had to reduce it down to its most basic element,
Mm-hmm.
is you are denying the full humanity of somebody.
Yes.
What is tied to our humanity, what they're talking about is care, is support, is play, is rest.
Mm.
And whether this is linked to the Industrial Revolution, it probably is. But when we started thinking human beings are like machines,
Yep.
and I think because we do also see time as a commodity, as a form of like capital, it's why we'll go and say time is money, and I'm
Yeah.
wasting time, all of those things. In a lot of ways, we are not seeing ourselves and one another as human and as
Mm.
being like being willing to accept the fullness of someone's humanity. I'm asking you to be everything but human. Your humanity actually is what we're trying to get rid of. Like, you need rest. Wait, what? You need to play. All of the here's a statement that I think I just need to name. What we are oftentimes holding in disdain is our humanity. That's just it. You know, it's actually not just like, that's actually the culprit of all of this. Is we have a deep self-hatred of our own humanity. We view ourselves or our humanity as weak. That's why we feel that way about vulnerability. It's why we feel that way about rest. Like, everything that makes us human, we don't affirm. We instead try to reject and get further and further away from that. And as a result, we get further and further away from ourselves and from genuine connection. And so that's why I go and say, like, I agree with their statements, because again, when I tie that to my understanding about injustice or about oppression, like that is what I'm studying. When I try to reduce it down, it at its core, again, is about rejecting someone and seeing them as a full human being.
It's dehumanization at its best, right?
At its core. And so that's why then when we talk about rest, when we talk about play as being radical acts, I cannot talk about the reason why I incorporated that into my being and into my life and divorce that from my Blackness and my Black womanhood in America, and seeing that for me as, yes, as my own affirmative statement that Black lives matter, not just in the sense of like no Black death, but saying, what have I and my people historically been denied of? We've actually been denied of rest. We've been worked like mule horses. And so to be able to go and say rest not only honors my own ancestors and former generations, but also this sense of honors my own humanity to say, like, no, you're not what everyone says. And I think that flows to every other, even if you're not Black or you're not in a marginalized group, is that we live in a culture that does not want you to be human and then asks you to take on that self-hatred.
Yes.
You know, and so being able to actually have embodied acts that say, and I'm just going to incorporate this last part and then I'm going to stop talking, I promise. but I come from an edge, like my training in undergrad was in education, but the philosophy that I learned under was that everything was basically this. Everything at its core is formational. It is forming you into something. And unless you have strategic actions, this is why they talk about like being anti-racist, having strategic actions to form you into what you want, a more restful and more joy-filled person, you're going to be formed into whatever else is trying to form you. And so they are radical acts, in my opinion, of justice and self-care and all of that, for sure. So I agree. That's all that say. I agree.
I am in awe. That was awesome. So that was great. Thank you for elaborating on that. I'm really interested in making sure that when we talk about these things about rest and play, right? Like I think often like one of Brene Brown's like widest audience is like, 40-year-old white women.
Yes.
And I think that it's important to identify that the things that these guideposts are lifting up are important for everyone, not just the main audience that gravitates towards her work. So I think it's worth lifting up there.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah. So again, thank you. I appreciate all of that. So knowing that this is really important, right? Rest is radical.
Yes.
Play is radical because of how it humanizes the person. What that again leads to is it leads to this understanding that when we deny ourselves our humanity, what that also does is it leads to our body feeling as though it were trauma.
Yes.
Which is why we experience these chronic conditions as a result of preventing those things. It's why it leads us to violence if we deny ourselves play, is because denying our humanity is traumatic.
Yes, I love that. Oh wow, that's powerful.
I kind of hate that, but like
but I'm saying in the way in which that you phrase that, like obviously I don't love the way, but we don't talk about it in that way. And I think that's what I love. We never actually say, hey, denying my humanity. We kind of view it as like, I'm not really denying my humanity. I'm just like not making taking time for rest, but you're like, no, 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 it is a form of trauma, like
Yes.
traumatizing ourselves. And
Yeah.
so when you said it in that way, I was like, man, that's good, because we don't frame it in that way at all. That's powerful.
Thank you.
You are honestly, you are so welcome.
Oh man.
Literally throwing laurels at your feet.
Yeah, I accept. So now that we know now that these things are important. So the thing that gets in the way is what you precisely named really well, is that we see exhaustion as this status symbol, right? This thing that we want to cling to. It's like, oh, when we're talking to, other students, it's like, oh, how late were you up writing your paper? Oh, I was up till midnight. Oh, I never went to sleep. Right. Like, it's like, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're working harder than me. Oh no, I'm not enough. Right. And then it's like, again, it goes back to this idea, and from the last guidepost, of comparison being the thief of joy. Right.
Exactly.
And so like, it sounds like, oh, just one more hour of work, or napping is for the weak, or push through, you can handle it, you can sleep when you're done, or you can sleep, to take it further, when you're dead. Right. And
oh my gosh,
like, when we are in a position of not having enough money to meet our basic needs, sleep becomes a luxury.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so not only are we in a position where that oppressive element is, we are denied our humanity, but we're also denied the option to choose our humanity.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so it really reminds me of Mako, who is, Mako and Bolin are really poor in Legend of Korra. They're, and he has to work multiple jobs, and he doesn't have the luxury to choose rest. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's dirty. Like, y'all rest. Like, that's the takeaway here. Like,
yes.
Like,
yeah.
The data suggests that we aren't capable of handling it as we think we are.
No.
Right.
No.
And like, we're a nation of stressed, exhausted adults. We're raising overscheduled, overstressed children. And we're so busy chasing happiness and joy and the extraordinary that it becomes a barrier to achieving happiness and joy.
Definitely. Definitely. And if I can interject with another point as well. And then there's also this, it's supposed to be a counter narrative movement of like, it's its own kind of self-care movement, of splurge, treat yourself. But interestingly enough, and I remember I thought about this a year or two ago, but I was like, this is about, in a lot of ways, it's not just this form of materialism, and it fuels consumerism as well, but it's also about access. And so I can only treat myself if I have money, if I have money left over. And so then it becomes like self-care, being able to care for yourself. Then I'm thinking about listeners who might think play and rest sound nice, but that sounds like a luxury, primarily because we have framed it, unfortunately, in that way on social media and all of those things, is that it is actually something you need to go buy. It's something that's always outside of yourself. It's
bigger house, better salary.
You need to spend money on bigger, better, more. Like, don't just get the small, what's it called, cup at Starbucks. Get the grande, get the venti. And I'm not saying don't do that, and that's against like care and rest and play. But what I am saying is that I believe rest and play are accessible, and at their core, they should be. If it's coming from a place of being, it should be accessible to all. And unfortunately, it's been commodified with marketing and all of these other things, and been exploited, that it's just spend more money. And so then there's people who are like, I can't rest, I can't play. That's a luxury for other people. When there's everyday things that we can live into and then be and practice that don't require all of that, So I just
well, and that really throws into sharp relief the thing that Brene Brown talks about in this book of my life changed when I switched my thought process from what's my dream list, which is it's that material portion, right? Oh, the bigger house, the better salary, this vacation that we need. How do I change it to a meaningful, like, these are the things that like our house values in terms of play and rest, and making a meaning list instead of for the house, instead of a dream list, right? Because one is materialistic and one is like more, and the other is how do I value the humanity that is in the room?
Yes. Oh my goodness. There's so much power there. I think if we also, that's good. I think if we link it to man, so when I think about if we want to go back to Avatar for just a period of time.
Yeah.
And
Always.
thinking about also the quotes about that self-care as this radical act, when I think about, I can't actually remember which episode this was in, but when King Boomy was putting Aang through all those tests. And it was Aang's creativity and an aspect of playfulness that helped him to survive.
Yes.
And so when you think about that context of like, who would think about creativity and playfulness is linked to survival, is linked to this actually helps you, it keeps you alive. It helps you thrive. We don't think about it in that way. We do think about it as a privilege instead of like, no, I think what you're getting at as well. And what Brene is getting at is like, no, you need this. Like, you need this. It's not a luxury. It's a need. It's a human need.
Yes. And it goes back to this foundational need for empathy, right? If play is what cultivates imagination, right? And allows us to feel empathy for others, right? If imagination is also probably the root source of much of our creativity, where if we're going to create something and bring it into the world, something that did not exist beforehand, it inherently requires an imagination, right?
Exactly.
And so what we're saying is you can't be creative unless you allow yourself to play.
Wow. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so one guidepost gone, unless joy gone, unless you allow yourself to play. Right?
And one could say the others kind of topple and crumble if they're all interconnected, which I think you're ultimately we're getting at. Then authenticity goes, joy goes,
all the things,
all the things. Peace out.
Y'all, this has been a lot of important stuff. I'm so glad that we've been able to have this conversation.
Same.
So y'all, like, rest is important, play is important, right? And I think one of the moments that comes up for me that I think I want to end on is this moment in Legend of Korra where Lin, who is, Toph's daughter, and she is in Zalfu, which is the metal bending town, and she comes upon this guard, and the guard's like, "Oh, I did like 20 push-ups last night. How many did you do?" And like, it's like, "Oh, I did like 50." And so Lin sees them like, and like, "You're slacking off," and like gets on them for resting and for, taking a moment to not be on. Right. And Lin is hyper critical of this, and she feels like she has to like, and then, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting his name. The main guy in Zalfu comes up to Lin and is like, "You can rest, like you don't have to work while you're here." Ai is his name. So Ai comes up to her and is like, "You don't have to work while you're here. This is a safe place." And I think that's a really important condition for us, is to realize that safety is a condition for being able to rest. Safety is a condition to be able to play, right? And I feel like sometimes we need explicit permission to rest and play. And so I think my challenge to everybody listening is, who needs your permission to play? Who needs your permission to rest, and what can you do to give them that permission right now? And sometimes it's like, who needs my permission? I do. I need my own permission. Like, how do I give myself permission to do these things as well? Oh man. So we had a long conversation here. What did we miss? Did we miss anything when it comes to rest, when it comes to play? What are the things that we like would have to talk about in order to solidify this conversation? And the answer might be nothing, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. I think what comes to mind for me is I think about maybe for those who could be listening and saying, okay, I've heard everything. I'm recognizing I'm not making space for rest or for play. It's important. I want to start doing that. And who might ask, what can I do today? How can I start practicing that?
Mm.
I think we've emphasized first it's a state of being. And so I think if I could speak to that a little bit, I would just say first, if we're starting from a place of being, I'm always a big advocate. This is free, but it's free, is to sit down with yourself and to ask, like, just to say, what do I believe about play? What do I believe about rest? And asking that, what do I believe about my own worthiness? Do I feel like I need to earn that first? Do I feel like I need to, am I saying things to myself that are like, yeah, we can do this, but after we finish this, then we've earned it. Why do I feel like I need to earn it?
Yeah.
Why do I feel like I need to earn goodness? When did I learn that? If you have the ability and you have a great therapist, they are great to work those things out with.
Yep.
But of course, I can go say, oh, you can always do all of these things. But I think if we emphasize that point about playfulness, play, rest, it first starts from a place of being. I would go and say it starts from a belief. Whether a truth that we're believing, whether it's helpful or not, I found that's what brought the shift in my life, is when I sat down with myself and I said, wait, I have all these messages in my head that I feel incredible shame when I stop for a second.
Yeah.
And I have this voice in my ear that's very angry with me. What does that voice sound like? And then in that way, being able to engage in some compassion with myself to say, hey, this is hard.
Yeah.
We can sit with it being hard. But like you said, when we're going up that hill, that mountain, we're learning how to bike, and it is hard work, but I can keep going, and then when I go down, when I start to engage in play and rest,
sigh of relief.
I experience that. Well, wait, okay. At first it's kind of scary, but wait, I'm laughing. I'm experiencing joy. The wind's in my face. It's fun. So I love that. Thank you for having me. This has been so great.
Yeah. Well, we're not all like we're done with like the main portion. We still have to. Okay. We have our end thing, which is what we do. So Brene ends all these chapters with her dig, right? Okay. So get deliberate, get inspired, get going. So we're gonna take a short break and come back in a few minutes after they have some music in their ears, and we'll be right on back. All right, everybody, welcome back. Hopefully you had a nice little musical teaser after our nice riveting conversation on rest and play. Now what we're doing is we're gonna start talking about how we put this into practice. And I'm really excited about that because Yazmin gave us this lovely benediction just now on how to do this. And I'm excited to kind of narrow that into 3 different things that Brene kind of ends her chapters with. And so for those of you who've been listening for a while, you'll know these. For those of you who are listening for the first time, there are 3 elements. So the first thing, and it uses the acronym DIG, right? So the first one is get deliberate. So how do we I also like to rephrase it and say we also deliberate, right? So what does it look like for us to put this into practice and begin like putting in our thought process? And I think what you said earlier was perfect for this. Like, how do you sit down and give yourself space to actually address what your embedded thoughts are, right, on these things? So is that something that you do? Is that something that you do often? Do you take time to just like meditate on these things?
Yeah. So to some degree, I think probably in the last 2 or 3 years, I tried to pay a little bit more attention to, I think, especially as she talks about shame, where I'm like, oh, I felt shame there. And
Mm,
then sometimes it's not the space or the time for me to address it right then and there, but it's like, okay, we're going to put a pin in that.
yep.
And then later, when that safety that you were talking about, that space, that time, if I'm able to have that, to go and say, okay, what was that? Why did I feel shame from that? Like,
Mm,
and oftentimes I do find when it, again, I'm like, I don't, a test can say, oh, you do really well with rest and play, but I'm talking about like, this was something I was wrestling with this past week. I was like,
yeah.
man, I'm just very down. And I realized because I was like, work, 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 we've got to work, we got to make money.
Yeah.
Um, and then when I paused and had this past weekend and I went to an art museum and I just walked around and having that stillness of thought, and I said, man, I'm realizing where that came from is that fear is guiding me in a lot of ways. And I feel like to stop triggers the sense of anxiety for me.
Mm,
And then to just with compassion to say, what am I afraid of? How
yeah.
about we invite that? And so again, that's a practice I did not know about, but I found like it's a way for me to practice self-compassion to say, hey, you are worth slowing down for, you're worth
Ooh,
hearing,
you
you
are
know?
worth slowing down for.
Yeah.
That's big.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah. When most of my life I was speeding through it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, everything.
So again, for Brene, what she says for getting deliberate is going back to this joy and meaning list, and writing a list of things that bring you joy, and writing a list of things that bring you meaning, rather than writing a list of like what you need to achieve, right,
Mhm.
in order to like finally be worth something, right? So what does it look like for us to make a joy and meaning list? What are the conditions under which everything feels right in our lives? And then how does that compare to your to-do list? Because if those two things are so different, then maybe we need to reconfigure what our to-do list looks like. So that's, I think, what Brene offers as a suggestion to get deliberate. And we heard from you also on like meditating on these moments, these red flag moments that come up, and then really being introspective about why did that happen? What's going on, so that we can work towards doing better and doing different in the future. Oh, okay. All right. So we're deliberate now. We are focused on cultivating rest and play. We believe in it, but now we need to get inspired. So DI, inspired. And so for me, one of the things is like, I love to learn. And so I went and started learning, and I read all of Stuart's Brown book on play, as you might have noticed. And when I was like,
I love
okay,
it.
rest is important, I was like, okay, I'm going to go follow the NAP ministry. I'm going to go listen to all these people that are advocating for rest. And so I love learning. And so I'm curious, like, what about you? What are the things that help you feel inspired to cultivate rest and play?
Yeah. Oh no, it's literally very similar. I think we're on the same wavelength with this one because I do the like that's what I did also with the NAP ministry. I tend to pay attention, especially to people where you can kind of feel that either from someone's life or
Mm-hmm.
and to say, oh, that's also someone I can learn from, and that
Yeah.
they love to share that from not from a place of, because you also know, not from a place of do all of these things. Here's a 5-step
Yeah.
plan,
Yeah.
and then you're like, okay,
Yeah.
you back away slowly.
No, thank
But
you.
thank you, but no thank you. Whether it's people on social media who model that so well, especially for me, when I'm seeing people from any form of in a marginalized community who are experiencing oppression and violence, who are saying, no, no,
Mm,
no, this is accessible. This isn't just like for the high and elite who can make time. Like this is,
yeah.
again, to that quote, here's an act of like this radical self-care. But again, it also looks like everyday people um, who um, who just also inspire me in that ways. I think about mentors, people
Yeah.
where it's like I put my phone on do not disturb. I'm like, oh, you can do that. like my phone's also supposed to be on me all the time. Be like,
Yeah.
nope. Not a period of my life. I had one friend recently. I texted them and they had said, they responded to me the next day. They said, oh, I'm sorry. Like I was doing like a Sabbath for the day where I just turned off my phone and I just had fun. I said, I should try doing that.
Well,
I've never done
I
that or
think
turned my
that's
phone on.
that's really important to lift up, because that's one of a couple of reactions. Somebody else might have the same thing and be like, I cannot believe you turned off your phone.
Exactly.
Like, right.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so I love that you are kind of feeding off of that and being like, ooh, that's a cool option. Right.
Never thought of
Versus
that.
like judging the person, because I think that's what creates those tapes in the first place, is that's when we realize that we're reacting off of our embedded judgments of these things. And that's when we're like, okay, let's go back to being deliberate again. I want to deliberate on this for a hot minute.
For sure.
So theoretically now we are super nerdy and inspired now. And we've gotten deliberate, we're inspired, and now it's time to turn it into action, right? Exactly. We have to get going. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, what is something that you plan on doing today that is an act of rest and or play?
Yeah. So one of them is later on this evening. It is my friend's birthday. And of course we were like, well, of course it was someone's birthday. You celebrate, you do things. Yeah. But one thing we decided on that, we were like, we're going to keep it spontaneous. Like, it doesn't really need to be hyper planned. We're just
leaving room for improv, right?
Improv and creativity. We're just going to drive around Chapel Hill, see what looks interesting, eat good food, probably go see Venom. And of course, in the back of my mind, it's like, well, yeah, we could do this reading. There's also this work that needs to get done. And I have to remind myself in that moment, honestly, there's always probably going to be work that's there waiting for me when I open the door. Hey, how are you? It's been a while.
Welcome to grad school.
And so I think when I remind myself, like I'm reminding myself today, that's always going to be there. But here's my radical choice to engage in celebration, to engage in play and joy and rest with another person. And so that's what I'm doing today. And I'm excited. So,
yeah. So I'm just going to issue a challenge to our listeners, right? So I'm going to tell, I want you to be rebellious against capitalism and say no today, right? Say no and take a nap. Say no and do something you love that is inherently joyful for you, that is purposeless. It's just for you. Do something that is your choice. That's my challenge for all of us, is to choose you today. Humanize yourself by resting and by playing. Take that action, right? And so, oh man, this has been amazing. This has been so good. So, wow, I'm like tingly all over.
All right, I'm like, there's an excitement, there's a thrum, there's an energy.
So next week, we are discussing Guidepost 8, which is cultivating calm and stillness, letting go of anxiety as a lifestyle, which is probably the one that I need the most. So I'm excited to talk about that. Same. Also, 8's my lucky number, which has nothing to do with the conversation, but that's just for fun.
It's like 8. Yeah.
And a reminder for everybody, that's pages 134 through 140 in the 10th anniversary edition. And so, Yazmin, you have been a gift and a joy for us today. If you want to share, if you want listeners to be able to contact you or say something or something along those lines, is there a way that you would like them to contact you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think probably Facebook's the most accessible. A direct message on Facebook. I'm pretty sure my name is going to be in the tagline, so you can just type. It's exactly how it comes up on Facebook. But I'm one of those people where I like to say I'm probably the most extroverted introvert you will meet. I love connecting with people. I just have the energy levels of an introvert. And so, yes, if you want any, just either stories, they don't even have to be questions. If you just want to reach out in any way, just DM me on Facebook, and I promise I will actually get back to you very quickly. I love talking with people. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. I suggest y'all take her up on that, because that's pretty cool. And clearly she has a lot to offer. So yeah, everybody, this has been Bending Not Breaking. Remember, you can find us on all the social medias at BNB_pod. And that's on Insta, that's on Facebook, that's on Twitter, all the TikToks, all the things, BNB_pod. And if you have enjoyed this episode, I highly recommend you checking out Yazmin and her social media as well. And then also, if you really like this episode, maybe going to give us a review on iTunes, preferably 5 stars. That would be cool. I would appreciate it. And maybe even some like, Patreon, that'd be cool. But you don't have to. Not everybody has the capacity to do that, right? Time is money, but also time is not money. Time is humanity. So like be human today. And it's not all about the money, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is a wrap. Yazmin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So filled with joy. And for everybody else, until next time, be well and do good.